The war on Iran is a civil war of human conscience, and the aggressors will lose no matter what the outcome. This is Two and a Mic.
Dung weche pek kod welo mabiro e Two and a Mic. Dung parodit kod jok mawuoye Two and a Mic. Seche tin sud buta wawinji e Two and a Mic. Wala wachokre wabed piny bi wawinje ero chako momit ndi Two and a Mic podcast makende.
In general, wars are never truly won, because every side incurs losses. Those losses most often need never have occurred. The reason being that wars are not fought to defend values and cultures. Not anymore. Wars of existence were fought, presumably millennia ago, back in the days when cultures were so localized, so contained and shielded, that by wiping out a single village or town, wiped out the culture off the face of the earth, in many cases with barely a shred of evidence to record of their passing. That could not feasibly happen today. There will always be remnants, there will always be survivors. The cultures will always live on. There are examples. The Assyrians still exist today as a people. Their culture is strong, their traditions are strong, and yet they haven't had a country for centuries. The Kurds are the same. They are like many nations in one. Like other nations, in fact, with different political parties, ideas, beliefs and cultures and religions. The Kurdish identity is rich because it has so much depth and diversity. The Kurds, having been considered a nomadic people for such a long time, also do not have a single place on an international map that belongs uniquely to them. Yet they are connected to their lands just as much as any indigenous people are connected to theirs. More recently, we can look at many African peoples who have somehow managed to survive the mass killings, deportations and genocides committed against them by Europeans and Arab traders and traffickers. Leopold of Belgium oversaw the slaughter of between 10 to 15 million Congolese. The Ottomans killed half the Armenian population of Armenia occupied by the Ottomans for 600 years, and still the Armenian culture lives on. Between 1933 and 1945, the Nazis murdered 6 million Jewish people who had lived for over 1,000 years without a country. Their culture and beliefs are still intact. So when countries, imperialistic nations like Russia, the USA and Israel today, talk about existence, it's not really true. In fact, it's actually a lie. There are people in today's world in danger of disappearing, but none of those peoples are Russian, US American or Israeli. A nation truly under existential threat would never wage war on another, let alone so many others. Democracy as a political system is more under threat from so-called democracies because of the terrible job they're doing in pretending to be democracies. I've spoken about it often enough, and I will no doubt return to it in the future the next time one of the world's most admirable democracies tries to kill free speech, or remove human rights, or passes another law to move closer, again, to being a police state through either an algorithm or a farce of a law. Let's also not talk about fighting wars to promote freedom. When you bomb a country, city, or a town, or a girls' school, you don't free people, you murder them. The intention to drop a bomb may be sold, try to be sold, that it is to put pressure on a government to fold or surrender, but its primary result is destruction and death. It is no different to a suicide bomber or a car bomb detonated by a group of extremists. Just because it is delivered by a government vehicle or ship or plane doesn't change the fact that it is a highly explosive device that was created with the sole purpose of killing. People will argue that because it was made by an official process paid for by a government, with specialist diplomatic negotiators in place to prevent a war at all costs, that professional generals came together to make an official assessment, that intelligence experts analyzed the potential scenarios of inaction versus action, and that a democratically elected leader took the final decision, all of this makes a difference. I can assure you that is complete rubbish. Cultures are different. When a culture perceives itself to be under threat, it moves into survival mode. Survival instincts differ based on circumstances, resources, and the various analyses of strengths and weaknesses of those on the battlefield. Humans may have created nation-states over the last 200 years, created citizenship passports and documents over the last 130 years, and laws of engagement to cover international crises. But as we have seen, when even the countries that drew up those plans don't respect them, a big finger pointing at the USA, UK, and a few others here, then anything people try to sell just doesn't cut it. A bomb exists to kill. Political intentions be damned. If people really want peace, then they will ask for it, mean it, and when people are talking, leave them to it. Not like this treacherous Trump regime whereby the negotiators declare on a Friday that talks are going well, and then by Saturday morning, the bombs are falling. That is the kind of tactic the British used in India and Afghanistan in the 1830s under the East India Company, and is one of the main reasons why the world is so screwed today. Who trusts Western nations when they have a history of deception and murder? The concept of regime change is a difficult one. As a person who values human lives and who believes social systems should be put in place to ensure people can reach their full potential without the fear of poverty or hunger or police brutality dictating how they live, I hate dictators. I believe people should have a choice not to live in a dictatorship. This is also why the principle of political asylum was created, which makes things all the more frustrating when so many democracies are now trying to circumvent their responsibilities under international conventions for the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. Bomb countries create refugees, refuse refugees, create chaos as a result, arm police, turn them into brigands, release them on the population, and you have Trump's ICE, as well as a few police forces in Europe that have been told to ignore freedom of speech if it's against genocide. I do not agree with brutal regimes, such as the one in Iran. That doesn't mean the world's most powerful nations should start bombing Iran, and everyone else then point to the bad things that have happened to the Iranian people over the years. The same thing happened with Saddam Hussein. The West knew that Saddam Hussein was a nasty piece of work, but for as long as he was playing ball, fighting Iran, for example, and selling oil in dollars, then that was fine. But when he started working on his own plans, then suddenly the Western world remembered the atrocities he had committed all those years earlier, during the period when Saddam Hussein had been an ally of the West. If the West gave a damn about the principles they claimed were so important, why didn't they convince their friend and ally, Mr. Hussein, to stop being such a murderous bastard when they could? The same thing goes for Gaddafi. In his younger years as leader of Libya, he did some horrible stuff, both to his own people and other peoples. Why didn't the West take him out then? They could have done so if they wanted to, but they didn't. Yet when he started using the resources of his country to serve his own people, when he wanted to fund a Pan-African project with Libyan gold, and when he wanted to reject the Western economic model, he was taken out. Just a few years earlier, he met the great British war criminal Tony Blair. Surely Board of Peace Tony B could have had a kind word or two in Gaddafi's shell-like. The mythical representative of international freedom and democracy, old Tone, who else but he in times of trouble? Tony Blair, who led the Labour Party to victory in 1997, when things could only get better, got so much worse. And most people, like me, didn't even realize it at the time. And that was then. It makes you wonder that with the chaos the current generations of politicians are sowing, how bad will the consequences be felt in 10 or 15 or 20 years' time? Osama bin Laden was a US asset for many years. He and his groups were trained, funded and armed by the CIA. They were created to be destructive. Why did they suddenly turn on their US-American friends? I don't know. I'm sure most people can come up with their own ideas on that question. So when 9/11 happened, why did it take so long to get him? Why did so many countries get attacked under the guise of the war on terror when the USA were apparently looking for him? Why did Syria bear the brunt of so much criticism when Bashar al-Assad didn't have anything to do with 9/11? Most of the perpetrators apparently had connections with Saudi Arabia. There were even suggested links of funding that went all the way up to the House of Saud. So why didn't the USA bomb Saudi Arabia? The Taliban were also trained to fight against the Soviets. They have accounted for many US and Western allied soldiers' lives. Why did the US and Israel not attack the Taliban? The Taliban are warlords that have deprived the women and girls of Afghanistan from their fundamental rights. When the West wants to fight for freedom, democracy and principles of equality, wouldn't that be a place to start? Or should we overlook some of the disgusting allegations coming out now about the child sex trafficking being conducted by the US military in Afghanistan? It really makes it hard to make a case for an army supposedly fighting for democracy and freedom when they are also abusing children at the same time. Instead, as the negotiating team looked to be on the brink of brokering an amazing deal with Iran, at a point when Iran had not attacked any nation without first being provoked to do so by other aggressive nations, the USA and Israel decided to start bombing Iran without the necessary legal permission of Congress in the USA. Can anyone else smell that tragic odor of irony there? Claiming a government needs to change because it is behaving like a rogue. It doesn't care about its own citizens. It disregards international peace. It doesn't respect human rights. It doesn't respect the principles of democracy in which two countries are the shining examples of freedom, democracy and defending international law to lead this heroic effort. None other than Israel and the USA. That sentence requires a very large amount of massaging to fit into a narrative people can follow without choking on their frustration. When people in the West grow up in times of peace, when there are no wars looming, and the world is focused on prosperity, scientific progress, technological development, and sporting triumph, they fall into the dream world of democracy. Parents go to work, kids go to school, we eat, we play, we sleep, rinse and repeat. We get educated, we discover what we want, what we like, and we make friends. We learn more of the world. We know that our way of life is good because we are living it. Nobody threatens us, unless you are a survivor of an attack, of course, in which case we know that 93.6% of sexual offences are committed by men, and the victims are almost always female, and by a long margin. I will come back to this later. The world tends not to attack us, and everyone is focused on creating a better world. Well, that only reflects pockets of society. In the areas of diversity in most of our nations, people experience a different world. Government bureaucracies don't work that efficiently. The police don't smile until they raise a weapon. Banks charge different rates. Healthcare is not so caring. Customer support isn't as supportive. Job fairs aren't fair, and the employers employ prejudice far too often. Education is laboured. Representation is niche. This disharmony spreads. We realize as we grow up that in our lovely home, things aren't as nice and harmonious as we thought. It takes real effort to clean up and do the gardening. The shopping is a hassle. Food is temperamental. Parents can be loud. and they don't like their kids having too much fun. Homework is a drain. Winters are cold, and sometimes the coats and socks don't keep us warm. Sometimes the blankets in winter aren't enough. The heating is off. People wear jumpers to bed. We learn in history about the slave trade. We are told about world wars. We are told about disease and death. We learn about political divides. And we learn simple answers to why our society is so good and other places don't do things as well as we do. Yet I know that someone's neighbour beats his family. The kids are usually too sick to go to school. Someone down the road is an ex-con and can't find work. There was a strike last week and lots of people were unhappy with their working conditions. The buses are always late. A grandmother had to wait in A&E for 3 hours last night. A dad just got laid off. Someone's sister quit her job, but she won't say why. She can be heard crying all the time, though. She only speaks to her mum about it. Someone overheard the words lawyer, money and local MP, and then the door was closed and they couldn't follow anymore. A kid visited a friend to play on their console. When he arrived, he was sweating and looking behind him as the door opened. There were some kids from the estate looking at him. They didn't look friendly. The kid said that was the last time he would come and asked if he could call his parents to get picked up. If they were to meet again, it would have to be at his place. Of course, no problem, but what happened? He said skin was a kind of protection, depending on where you were. Let's put ourselves in some of these situations. We get a bit older. We hear all the things politicians say, and a lot of it just doesn't ring true. Then the politicians start getting angrier and talking about race and migration and foreigners and languages. And we think about friends at school and how everyone was just cool. Sure, there were some issues, but we all got on. Relationships were never based on external characteristics. Most of the people in school were like that. My football club was also like that. The teams we support in the Premier League have people from different backgrounds and we support them all. Then the politics got worse. The lies got worse. But the absolute worst thing was that the people started to believe them. Yet the neighbour who was beating his family was a local. The sister's boss had been a pillar of the community for 40 years until he was arrested for sexual abuse. They weren't migrants. And so the penny starts to drop. Politicians are not telling us the truth because they're not selling us solutions. I'll cut a long story short. Politicians are lying to keep us diverted from the plans they have for when they get into power. If we really had a democracy, why would the majority of people in these countries still be so poorly represented? Why would the majority be so badly treated? Yet the ones who treat us badly are not politicians, but people like ourselves, who put on uniforms of different types and vicariously deliver pain to others, usually because they don't have a choice. Civil servants make us jump through hoops. Poor people pay more in insurance and banking fees and get higher interest rates for loans. The police are less friendly, if at all. The nurses go missing from the wards when we need them most because of the cuts. The ambulances don't always arrive as soon as we need. Public transportation is expensive and late and inefficient. Bosses are rude and don't take concerns seriously. Our take-home pay buys us less and less every year. Teachers are told to follow a set curriculum. Community facilities are closing down. Libraries are crumbling and leaking. The government says we have to pull together and make things work. Yet there was a report of the government meeting last night somewhere where they all arrived in limos dressed in sparkling outfits at some huge castle. There were servants everywhere and the tables were packed with amazing food. They seemed to be doing okay. They didn't need to pull together or share a pizza. Then the next day the government announced it was spending billions to defend people in a country far away to make sure our way of life was also protected. But lots of people want that way of life to change. They don't want it to stay the same. Spend those billions on us, they say, on our kids' education, on our health services, on our communities, on our infrastructure. Democracy is dying as a result. Politicians talk about patriotism like only they know what the word means. But they are the only ones who don't know what the word means. They think patriots die for their countries. I think patriots live to protect their families and communities. People are being told that the money from our taxes are to be spent on fighting for democracy. Well, we're fighting for democracy back at home when we protest against war, against the drop in pay for nurses and doctors and train drivers. We are fighting for democracy when we protest against Palantir. We are fighting for democracy when we protest against our government's complicity in genocide. We are fighting for democracy when we demand the release of the Epstein files and for the rapists and pedophiles to be caught and tried in a court of law. We are fighting for our democracy when we protest against student fees. We are fighting for our democracy when we protest against the fossil fuel lobby and government policies to slow down the process of energy transition. We are fighting for democracy when we demand equal gender rights in a flawed system. We fight for democracy when we protest against institutionalized racism. We fight for democracy every day back at home because we don't have a working democracy. Our democracy needs investment. It needs support from the communities that have been marginalized. It needs groups from different backgrounds to come together to tell government what we want. And government has to do it because government works for us. We don't work for the government. They are our representatives. They are not our overlords or kings or queens. They rule by the right we give them. So they have to do what we want and nothing else. We don't want to send our kids to die on beaches or in deserts. We don't want our kids to be beaten or shot by police in our own towns. We don't want our daughters raped by politicians and billionaires. We don't want politicians to look at non-white people as though they are not equal. Who have we become that we find it normal that politicians no longer work for us, for our interests, and along the lines that we want them to? Who are we? People no longer understand the political class because that class has pulled itself away from the public they represent. The limited interfaces that exist are chasms. There are security guards that prevent people demanding answers. People are arrested for expecting transparency. Politicians want to lie with impunity and expect to be protected for doing so by the police who are paid by the people demanding answers. How screwed up is that? We are paying people who beat us if we demand answers from people we have elected. What the hell? Sexual violence against women is normalized by the political class. How do we know this? We know this because despite very good indications that somebody is much too close to a convicted child rapist, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer gives him a cushy job in the Foreign Office. Or when the FBI interviews survivors of sexual abuse, the Department of Justice sits on the paperwork and tries to cover it up. Or when Epstein was convicted of child sex trafficking, someone from high up in the government says, oh, he's a security asset, and so they should go leniently. That is not a system where law and order exists. That is a flawed system run by crooked men facilitating corruption and criminality on a global scale. Conspiracy theorists have for so long talked secretly about mystical international cabals, they missed the glaringly obvious ones forming before their eyes. In fact, there are so many stories coming out now that not long ago government representatives laughed off as conspiracy theories, like just saying the words made it true, or that people should believe the government, which has covered up insane amounts of criminal behavior, terrorism, false flag events, drug and sex trafficking, assassination, coups d'etats, genocides, and mass incarceration. Those same governments should be believed when someone calls them out on their crimes. Not anymore. The Epstein files are Pandora's box. All the media companies that have fallen in line and followed the government tack and facilitated the cover-up, or have simply assisted by spreading misinformation to further divert focus from the truth, they are not journalists. They are government-sponsored propagandists, and unfortunately, they have become the majority of our press coverage. So when someone tries to sell you a war, and they do it by appealing to an understanding of principles that do not exist even in your country, don't buy it, not even for an instant. Tell them to get their own house in order before they try to fix someone else's. On top of that, tell your politicians to address the failures they have forced on a public that trusted them with the responsibility of public office and which they abused to enrich themselves with. Tell them to respect international law and stop supporting genocides and sexual abuse and murder. Tell them to start representing the interests of their people and not fossil fuel companies, rogue nations and big tech. Tell them to start making proper plans for climate change. Tell them to introduce full and real gender equality. Tell them to stop pretending they are doing the will of God when they kill children and non-combatants. Tell them racism has always been wrong and has no place in a decent society. Tell them they need to address the unfair distribution of wealth. Tell them the law should be applied equally to everyone. Tell them to fix the problems that decades of corruption has created. Tell them that the establishment needs to be disbanded. And if they still want to go to war, tell them to go to hell instead. This is Two on a Mic. Rise up and be curious.
Two and a mic. Two and a mic. Two.